They mocked him, laughed at his poverty, and treated him like he didn't matter. Yet he went to prison for a murder he didn't commit, all for loyalty. And when he walked out, he became the heir to an empire. But it wasn't always like this. Malik had lived a life stacked against him, where every glance, every word, every choice reminded him that he didn't belong. Then came the day that changed everything. This is the story of Malik, the boy everyone underestimated, the man who survived, and the empire built from his sacrifices. The room was dim, the kind of place where shadows whispered more than people did. A basement poetry club, with only a handful of strangers scattered in mismatched chairs. On stage stood a young man, dark-skinned, tall yet somehow small, clutching a worn notebook like it was the only thing holding him together. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They say my skin is too shadowed for the sun, my dreams too fragile for the streets. But even shadows hold light if you dare to look close enough." The words floated out, raw and delicate, but the response was barely more than polite applause. A cough, a chair scraping, then silence. He lowered his eyes, hurried off the stage, and disappeared into the night. That boy was Malik, 21 years old. A dreamer in a world that hated dreamers. Home was no refuge. In the small, crumbling house where he lived, Malik's stepbrothers sat with beers in hand, mocking every attempt he made to reach them. "Still wasting time with poems?" they jeered. Malik slipped away, hiding in his room, where no one could take his words from him. Only one voice ever softened the noise, his sister, Sarah. She knocked gently, stepped in, and smiled the way only a sister who understands can. "Don't listen to them. Your words matter. You matter." And for a moment, Malik believed her. The next day on campus, he saw her, Naomi, a white girl, bright, graceful, alive in a way Malik only dreamed of being. She laughed with her friends, sunlight catching her face. Malik watched from a distance, heart thundering, notebook pressed to his chest. If she were a song, he thought, he would play her forever. But some music isn't meant for broken radios. Still, hope is a stubborn thing. Later, as Naomi left her bag on a bench, Malik's hand trembled as he slipped a folded poem into it. A secret offering, a piece of his soul. Then he turned and walked away, fast, before his courage broke. And with that single act, Malik set into motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. By the time Naomi opened her bag later that day, the hallway was nearly empty. She pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper, curious. Her eyes scanned the words. It wasn't just a poem, it was a confession. A voice that spoke of loneliness, of yearning, of beauty she didn't know she carried. Naomi's gaze skimmed over him, dismissive as always, seeing only the poor, dark-skinned dreamer she had always thought him to be. Her father, a strict conservative man with a voice like iron, found the letter tucked inside her books. Rage thundered across his face. He didn't care for poetry. He didn't care for innocence. All he saw was a boy from the wrong side of town daring to step where he didn't belong. That night, Malik was summoned. He stood in front of Naomi's family, trembling, his notebook still in his hands. Her father's words were sharp, unforgiving. "You dare to shame my daughter?" Before Malik could speak, the slap came. Loud, brutal, echoing through the house. His cheek burned, but the silence that followed cut deeper than the sting. He wanted to explain, to tell them the truth that it wasn't disgrace or failure he had brought, but love. But no one wanted to listen. Naomi stood still. She said nothing. Not a word in his defense. Her eyes barely met his. Indifference, maybe even contempt. Malik couldn't tell. In that silence, his heart cracked. When he stumbled back into the night, the world felt heavier than ever. The laughter of his stepbrothers, the scorn of his family, Naomi's silence. It all pressed down until Malik couldn't breathe. On the rooftop of his building, he stared at the city lights, each one a reminder of the lives he didn't belong to. Tears blurred his eyes. The thought came sharp and cruel. Maybe the world would be better without him. But as Malik leaned forward, a voice broke through the darkness. "Hey, don't do it!" It was a classmate, Carter, the quiet type who always noticed more than he spoke. He rushed forward, pulling Malik back from the edge. "What the hell are you doing, man?" Carter's voice cracked. "You think ending it is the answer? You think your words don't matter?" "They do. They always will." Malik collapsed into his arms, sobbing, the weight of the night finally spilling out. For the first time, someone held him, not with judgment, but with understanding. And in that broken, fragile moment, Malik chose life. But deep inside, he knew life would never be the same again. Days blurred into weeks, but the wound in Malik's chest didn't heal. Word spread across campus faster than fire on dry grass. Naomi was no longer just the quiet crush of a boy with too many poems. She was now engaged to James, the golden boy of the college. James had everything Malik didn't: confidence, charm, a smile that won over every professor and every parent. For Naomi's family, he was perfect. For Malik, he was a reminder of everything he could never be. The wedding was small, but loud enough for Malik to hear the echoes. Naomi in white, glowing under the soft lights. James beside her, proud and certain. And Malik, sitting alone in his darkened room, stared at the notebook on his lap. Page after page filled with her name, her smile, her laughter that was never meant for him. He tore one page out, crumpled it in his fist, and whispered to himself, "It was never my story to tell." The rejection wasn't just Naomi's silence that night. It was the laughter of his brothers in the kitchen, the sneers of neighbors who called him a shadow. The way even strangers looked past him, as though dark skin erased existence. Every voice told him the same truth. He was invisible until he was unwanted. The church bells rang out across the neighborhood, their chimes cutting like glass. Inside, Naomi walked down the aisle, every step carrying her further away from Malik's dreams. James stood at the altar, tall and certain, the kind of man everyone wanted for their daughter. Malik wasn't there, of course. He couldn't be. Instead, he sat alone in his room, the curtains drawn, the glow of the city bleeding through the cracks. On his desk lay the last poem he'd ever written to Naomi, folded but never given. His fingers hovered over it, then pushed it into the trash. For the first time in his life, Malik didn't write, didn't dream, didn't breathe poetry. He just sat there in silence, letting the world move on without him. Later that night, Carter showed up again. No speeches this time, just a six-pack in hand. He dropped it on the table, sat across from Malik, and cracked one open. "To hell with the world," Carter muttered. Malik almost laughed. Almost. But instead, he whispered, "Maybe the world's right. Maybe I'm not meant for anything more." Carter leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Nah, the world's blind, Malik. One day they'll see. And when they do, you won't just be the boy they ignored. You'll be the man they can't forget." Malik wanted to believe him. He really did. But all he felt was emptiness. As the night grew heavy, Malik walked to the mirror. His reflection stared back. Dark skin, tired eyes, shoulders that carried too much weight. And for the first time, he whispered to himself, "I will not break. Not yet." Somewhere in the distance, fireworks cracked over the city, Naomi and James celebrating their new life together. But Malik's story was only just beginning. Because out there, waiting beyond the heartbreak, was a storm named Riley. And once she crossed his path, nothing in Malik's world would ever be the same again. The morning after Naomi's wedding, Malik moved through the house like a shadow. His brothers were already at the kitchen table, voices sharp, arguing over bills stacked high like a wall they could never climb. Rent overdue, utilities past due, credit collectors calling every other hour. And when their frustration reached its breaking point, all eyes turned to Malik. "Stop hiding behind poems. This family doesn't need pretty words. It needs money." The jab landed like a punch, but Malik stayed silent, swallowing his anger like he always did. Then Sarah walked in, her face pale, eyes heavy with a secret she hadn't chosen. She sat quietly until one of the brothers blurted it out. "There's a way to fix this," he said. "Mr. Whitman's been asking about her. He's loaded. He said he'd help us out if Sarah gave him a chance." Mr. Whitman, the landlord, twice her age, with cold eyes and a smirk that made Malik's stomach twist. Sarah's lips trembled. "I don't want this. He makes my skin crawl." But the brothers waved her off. "It's not about what you want. It's about what this family needs." In that moment, Malik's chest burned with helpless fury. His only sister, the one person who had ever protected him, was being sold off. That night, Malik sat alone in his room, fists clenched, staring at his empty notebook. The words wouldn't come. Only a vow. "I'll find a way to save her. I don't care what it costs." And that vow would soon lead him straight to Riley. Riley didn't ease into Malik's life. She burst into it like gasoline meeting fire. It happened outside the college gym. A knot of students gathered in a shouting circle. Malik edged closer, notebook in hand, until he saw her. Short cropped hair, leather jacket, fists flying. Riley was in the middle of the brawl, landing punches with wild, reckless laughter. Campus security broke it up, dragging people apart. Riley spit blood, smirked at Malik watching from the edge, and called out, "What's the matter, Shakespeare? Never seen a girl fight harder than the boys?" Malik froze, stammering. By the time he found words, she was gone, leaving nothing but a curl of cigarette smoke in her wake. But Riley wasn't just chaos, she was also a problem her parents wanted to solve. Everyone on campus whispered about it. She was the wild daughter from a well-off but conservative family, the kind who embarrassed her parents at every turn. And now they were desperate enough that word spread. If someone could settle Riley down, her family would back them financially. A quiet bribe, dressed up as a chance for stability. For most guys, Riley was trouble they'd never touch. For Malik was Sarah's future hanging by a thread. It sounded like a lifeline. That night, lying in bed, Malik thought about the offer. A girl he didn't know, a future he didn't want. But the money could save Sarah, could stop Mr. Whitman, could buy her freedom. For the first time, Malik considered a deal that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. It took Malik days to gather the courage. He found Riley on the back steps of the gym, headphones blasting, cigarette dangling. She eyed him like prey. "You finally here to say something, poet boy?" she asked. Malik swallowed hard. His voice came out shaky but determined. "I know what your parents want, and I know what they're offering. I'm willing." Riley blinked, then burst out laughing loud, unrestrained, the kind that echoed off the brick walls. You think I'm going to go along with some deal just because my parents are waving money around? You're crazier than I am." Her laughter cut, but her next words cut deeper. "I'd rather burn my life to the ground than be somebody's transaction." And just like that, she walked away, leaving Malik standing there, humiliated and hopeless. But Riley wasn't done. Within a week, she vanished completely. Rumors swirled that she'd run away, gone off the grid, maybe for good. Her parents were furious. And Malik? Malik was left empty-handed, no deal, no money. All he had now was the echo of Riley's laughter, and the crushing weight of desperation, closing in tighter than ever. The night Riley disappeared, Malik sat alone on the edge of his bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. The house was silent, but the silence wasn't peace. It pressed on his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. Sarah's door was shut. He could hear her muffled sobs through the thin wall. His brothers whispered downstairs, scheming and counting the money Whitman might offer them. Malik's notebook lay open on his lap. The page was blank. No poems came. Just a hollow ache where his inspiration used to live. He thought of Riley, her wild grin, her reckless freedom. For a fleeting moment, he envied her. She could leave everything behind, start over. Malik couldn't. Not yet. But then a flicker of resolve sparked. He picked up his pen. Words spilled slowly at first, then faster, filling the pages with fury, sorrow, and a truth no one in his hometown wanted to hear. Poetry was all he had, his only way to fight back, even if it couldn't change what had already happened. There had been people who quietly appreciated him, who had seen the heart behind the shy, awkward boy like Lauren, a classmate from college. She admired his words, his sincerity, his unshakable honesty. But even she was trapped by the world Malik was beginning to understand. Her mother, protective and pragmatic, had forced her to stay away. Malik remembered watching from across the quad as Lauren walked off, crushed but polite, her mother's words echoing in his ears. A broke dreamer like him? Don't waste your time. That sting cut deeper than any insult his brothers had thrown at him. In that moment, Malik realized something cold and sharp. No matter how pure his intentions, no matter how honest or talented, the world rewarded only wealth, power, and connections. And speaking of Sarah, that night the stepbrothers cornered her with an ultimatum. Whitman had offered to clear the family's debts, pay overdue bills, and even slip them a generous sum, all in exchange for Sarah agreeing to spend time with him under his terms. She had no real choice. Her family's survival was on the line. Malik watched from the shadows as Sarah hesitated, shoulders slumping with quiet resignation. Alone in the dark, Malik finally made a decision. He couldn't stay here anymore, not with Whitman breathing down their necks, not with his family's greed twisting every moment, not with Sarah trapped in a life she didn't choose. The notebook in his hands was filled with words, with poetry, with dreams, and it was all he would take with him. Malik packed a small bag, leaving his room quietly, and stepped into the night. His hometown disappeared behind him, but the vow he had made to protect, to rise, to create, burned brighter than ever. Malik stepped off the Greyhound into the heart of Chicago, the skyline jagged against a gray autumn sky. The air smelled of diesel, wet asphalt, and opportunity disguised as danger. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, his bag slung over one shoulder, and took his first tentative steps into the city that would either swallow him or shape him. The streets were alive with noise, honking cars, sirens slicing through the hum of the city. Every corner held a story, every shadow a potential threat. Malik felt small, invisible, yet strangely alert, like a poet walking into a war zone. He found a cheap room in a rundown boarding house where the landlord eyed him with suspicion and the neighbors kept their distance. But Malik had learned long ago to navigate judgment, to move quietly, to make himself almost invisible when needed. By morning, he had found a factory on the outskirts of town, its brick facade worn, smoke rising from its chimneys in thin, steady lines. This was the place everyone whispered about Victor King's operation. Legitimate on paper, dangerous underneath. Malik knew instinctively that the man behind the factory ran more than machines. He ran a world built on fear, loyalty, and cold efficiency. Malik showed up at the factory doors, holding a simple application, hoping to get a foot in somewhere, anywhere that could offer honest work. Inside, the noise of machines clanging, workers shouting, and the hits of steam filled his ears. Malik stuck to the edges, observing. Every face told a story, some desperate, some hardened, some carefully neutral. It wasn't long before Malik's honesty and quiet diligence caught the attention of a floor supervisor. He was assigned a simple task: oversee a small shift, track inventory, report anomalies. Malik worked methodically, noticing patterns, keeping careful notes, never drawing attention to himself beyond competence. And that's when Victor King saw him, not for his strength or bravado, but for something rare: truthfulness in a world where lies paid better, loyalty in a world where betrayal was currency. Malik didn't know it yet, but this quiet observation would be the first step into a life he had never imagined, one that would challenge everything he believed about morality, power, and survival. Malik's diligence didn't go unnoticed. A week into his shift, Victor King's assistant called him into the office, the room heavy with leather, dark wood, and the scent of expensive cigars. Malik's heart raced, but he held himself steady. "Malik," the assistant said, sliding a folder across the desk. Victor wants to see you for a new assignment. It's specialized. When Malik entered Victor King's office, he didn't meet the cold, calculating eyes he had expected. Instead, Victor observed him silently, leaning back in a leather chair like a predator testing a new prey. Malik's instinct whispered danger, but also opportunity. "You're honest," Victor said finally, voice low and deliberate. "You don't lie. You don't cheat. That's rare. I need someone who can handle responsibility. Starting tomorrow, you'll be assigned to protect my wife." Malik blinked. Protect Victor's wife? A bodyguard? His mind raced. He knew this wasn't a simple job, yet he also knew it was an opportunity, the first chance in his life, to rise above survival, to carve a place for himself in a world that had never welcomed him. The next day, Malik met Katie King. She was glamorous, confident, everything Malik wasn't. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a warmth, almost a charm that drew him in. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Malik felt recognized not for his struggle, not for his poverty, but simply as a person. But charm can be dangerous. Katie confided in Malik about her secret affair, speaking softly, trusting him in a way she trusted no one else. Malik felt torn. He knew what she was doing was wrong. He knew loyalty to Victor demanded he report everything, and yet there was something in her vulnerability, the loneliness behind the wealth and power, that made him hesitate. Malik's conscience battled his curiosity, his desire to do right battling the pull of empathy. He realized quickly, in Victor King's world, every choice came with a cost. Every act of kindness could be twisted, every hesitation exploited. And just as Malik began to navigate this delicate line, the city reminded him again why trust was scarce and danger everywhere. A phone call in the middle of the night. Victor had discovered Katie's betrayal. The man he had come to respect feared act swiftly, brutally. Malik heard the whispers later, the stories that chilled him to the bone. Victor had killed both Katie and her lover. Malik survived, spared not by chance, but by Victor's assessment of his usefulness. Alone in his small apartment that night, Malik's hands shook as he wrote. His poetry, once a refuge, now felt like the only lifeline to his morality. He realized the world was not just unfair, it was deadly, and even innocence could be weaponized against itself. It didn't take long for Victor to act. Malik was summoned to the office, the weight of the city pressing through the glass windows around him. Victor's expression was unreadable, his voice calm, almost clinical. "You've been loyal," Victor said. "Very loyal. That counts for something." He let the silence stretch like a knife. "But loyalty has its limits. For the law, you'll take the fall for what happened. For me, you survive." When the men arrived to escort him, Malik didn't resist. He had spent his whole life being dismissed, judged, looked down upon for his skin, his poverty, his status. What could he say now? Even though he hadn't committed the crime, the world expected him to carry the weight. Life had already shut him down, and he silently accepted the role the city had assigned him, guilty. Inside the cold cell, Malik sat on the hard bench, staring at the cracked ceiling. His notebook, hidden under his coat, was his only lifeline. Words spilled onto its pages, poetry, yes, but also raw truth, betrayal, injustice, the cost of surviving in a world that punished honesty. He realized something essential. Loyalty, integrity, and innocence could be exploited, and even the purest heart could be condemned. Yet even in despair, a small flame burned inside him. Malik had survived. His conscience remained intact, and deep down he knew this was not the end, it was preparation for the life he would rise into, stronger, wiser, and unbroken. The cell was small, cold, and silent, except for the distant echoes of other inmates and the occasional clang of the metal door. Malik sat on the narrow bench, his notebook open on his lap. Words flowed, sharper now, heavier poetry, yes, but also the chronicles of betrayal, injustice, and survival in a world that punished integrity. He thought of Katie, of Victor, of the city that had swallowed him whole. Even now, he didn't hate Victor. There was a strange respect in Malik's heart for the man's ruthlessness, for the clarity with which he pursued power. Malik had survived the storm because of his honesty, his courage, and the quiet strength he had carried all his life. Days turned into weeks. Malik's routine was prison as usual. Work details, meals, brief moments of reading and writing. Yet beyond the prison walls, Victor King was unraveling. For the first time in his life, Victor carried a burden he could not shake. Malik had taken the fall for Katie's death, a crime Victor himself had committed. The boy had done it without protest, without a word of resistance. Loyalty like that was rare, almost unthinkable. And Victor, a man who built his empire on fear and betrayal, could not escape the weight of it. Every night he saw Malik's face in his mind, the quiet acceptance, the unspoken trust. Victor had demanded loyalty all his life, but never had anyone given it so freely, so completely. It gnawed at him, cracked something in him. And so the empire began to crumble. Rivals circled, law enforcement pressed harder, but the real undoing wasn't outside forces. It was the guilt of knowing that a young man's life had been sacrificed for his own sins. At last, Victor made a choice. Together with one of his most trusted employees, he left behind sworn statements, signed confessions, and evidence that proved the truth. Victor King himself had killed Katie and her lover. The documents were delivered through his lawyer to the courts, ensuring Malik would be released. Then the unexpected came for Malik. His cell door creaked open, and a guard handed him a folded envelope. The paper was thick, official, sealed with Victor King's insignia. Malik's hands trembled as he unfolded it. Victor was dead. Suicide. The letter inside explained it all. Under mounting pressure from enemies, from the law, and most of all, from his own conscience, Victor had chosen to end his life. And in an astonishing twist, everything he owned, his wealth, businesses, and criminal empire, was left to Malik. Malik read the words over and over, trying to absorb their meaning. The world that had mocked him, overlooked him, dismissed him for his skin and status, had just delivered the ultimate paradox. The man who had destroyed so much of his life had also freed him and entrusted him with everything. He closed the letter and leaned back, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Malik felt a strange mix of emotions, disbelief, sorrow, even a quiet satisfaction. Loyalty, honesty, and integrity had not gone unnoticed, even if the world had punished him for them first. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the shift in power, unaware that the quiet, dark-skinned poet, who had been dismissed by everyone, was about to emerge with wealth, influence, and the opportunity to finally control his own destiny. The gates swung open to the sound of engines humming in unison. A fleet of black cars pulled into the prison yard, their tinted windows reflecting the gray sky. Malik stepped out into the free air, blinking against the sudden brightness. Waiting for him was a reception he never imagined. Victor King's men, lined in formation, suits pressed, heads bowed slightly in respect. For the first time in his life, Malik wasn't dismissed. He was welcomed with protocol, with reverence. As the car doors opened, he was ushered into the back of a sleek, black SUV. The ride was silent, but heavy with meaning. Outside, the city blurred past, but Malik wasn't the same man who had entered it months ago. He wasn't just Malik, the broke poet. He was Malik, heir to Victor King's empire. The convoy pulled up to a sprawling estate, a villa so vast it seemed to breathe with power. Marble steps, tall glass windows, and a fountain that never stopped running. Malik stood frozen for a moment, notebook still in his hand, like it didn't belong in a place like this. But the staff lined up at the doors, waiting, ready to bow their heads to him. Inside, the house carried Victor's shadow, grand, cold, built for power, not warmth. Malik walked its halls, meeting the employees one by one. Some were cautious, others relieved. At last, his eyes landed on a man standing apart from the rest, younger, rough around the edges, but steady. His name was Powell, brother of one of Victor's most loyal men. a man who had lost his life in Victor's battles. Malik saw something familiar in him. Loyalty, honesty, the kind that survived even when everything else fell apart. Malik asked him a simple question. Will you stand with me? Powell nodded once. Always. And just like that, Malik had his first true ally, not out of fear, but out of respect. The next morning, Malik stepped into the factory Victor had once commanded. The workers stopped what they were doing, whispers rushing across the floor. Malik, the outsider, the boy mocked for his skin and poverty, was now their boss. He walked past them with quiet dignity, knowing every eye was on him. For the first time, power wasn't something he admired from afar. It was his. Word spread fast. Malik returned home in the style cars outside, expensive suits, wealth radiating from every move he made. And suddenly, the same family that had ridiculed him, dismissed him, treated him like a burden, showered him with affection. His stepbrothers smiled too wide. Greed dripped from their words. But Malik didn't argue. He had expected nothing less. But not everyone who came to him now carried greed in their eyes. One evening, as Malik returned from the factory, he was told that Mr. Whitman and Sarah were waiting for him. The name alone pulled Malik back to darker days, back when Whitman was the landlord who had once hovered over his sister like a wolf, a man of wealth and cold eyes. But now, when Malik stepped into the room, he saw no wolf. Whitman sat beside Sarah, thinner, humbled, his posture no longer proud. Life had stripped him down. An accident years ago had destroyed his fortune, left him with nothing but debts and regret. And it was in those days, Malik remembered, when desperation ruled his own house, that he had sold his poetry to a greedy publisher for quick cash. He had taken that money that should have been for his dreams and placed it quietly into Sarah's hands, saving her from ruin. The man who bought those poems had published them under his own name, his false success built on Malik's words. Malik had let it go. He had no choice. But Sarah never forgot. Neither had Whitman. Now Whitman's voice cracked as he spoke. Your sister. She saved me. She stayed when everyone else left. And you, Malik, you gave her the chance to. That money, those words you sacrificed, they carried us through. Sarah placed her hand over Malik's. We want to return it to you now. Everything you gave up for me. For a long moment, Malik couldn't speak. He looked at them. Whitman, once his tormentor, now softened by hardship, and Sarah, the only light that had ever stood by him. And for the first time since Victor's empire had fallen into his lap, Malik felt something genuine. Not greed, not envy, not false affection. Gratitude. He didn't take the money. Instead, he simply said, keep it. What I gave was never for return. It was for love. Whitman lowered his head, ashamed, while Sarah's eyes glistened with pride. Malik left that night with a rare feeling in his chest, a reminder that even in the darkest days of his poverty, he had chosen right. But the next evening, that warmth was tested. Naomi was waiting, the same Naomi who had chosen Marcus over him. Now her eyes were soft, almost pleading. Marcus, the man she had chosen, had failed her. Gambling, lies, a ruined home. She glanced around at the gold-framed paintings, the silk curtains, the life she had thrown away. Her voice trembled with regret, but her eyes shone with hunger. Maybe we could start over, she whispered. Malik looked at her for a long time. The boy who once longed for her love would have given anything to hear those words. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't want him. She wanted his success, his wealth, his power. No, he said quietly, turning away. That part of my life is over. Her lips tightened. Behind her, Marcus appeared not arrogant anymore, but weary, ashamed. For once, Malik felt no anger, only pity. But fate wasn't done testing him. At a downtown cafe, he crossed paths with Lauren again. The girl who once admired him from afar was now a shadow of her old self struggling. Her dreams of acting crushed under the weight of the real world. She stirred her coffee, shaking her head. Funny, isn't it? My mother once told me not to waste my time on a broke dreamer like you. Now look at me broke, dreaming, and alone. Malik didn't laugh. He offered her a seat, listened to her story, and for the first time in years felt a flicker of hope for someone else's art. He offered to fund her projects, to give her the chance to create again. Lauren looked at him, stunned. Why would you do this? Malik answered softly, because I know what it's like to be silenced. Weeks passed. Malik's empire grew. Respect followed him now. Power bent around him. Even the ones who had mocked him bowed their heads. But at night, alone in that vast house, Malik sat at his desk with the notebook open. The words came, but they didn't taste the same. Wealth had given him everything he thought he wanted: respect, influence, power. And yet, silence was louder than applause. Wealth had given him the crown, but it was hollow, and the weight of it pressed heavier than the chains of poverty ever had. Malik had grown used to noise, the endless buzz of employees flattering him, the hollow clinking of glasses at banquets, the shallow laughter of people who only cared for his wealth. But one night, alone in his study, he turned on the radio for background sound. The voice that filled the room stopped him cold. It was calm, melodic, carrying warmth like a lantern in the dark. The program was called Echoes of the Soul, a late-night broadcast run by a blind host named Anna. She didn't read from a script. She spoke like she was sitting across from you, listening, understanding. And then she began to read poetry. His poetry. The words Malik had scribbled in the margins of his pain, stolen long ago, published under another man's name. Anna read them aloud as though they were sacred. Malik leaned forward, his chest tightening. She spoke each line with a reverence he had never heard before, like she was reaching into his very soul. The next night, he tuned in again, and again, and again. For the first time since Victor's empire had fallen into his lap, Malik didn't feel like a king or a criminal. He felt human. When he finally called into the station, his voice shook. Your words, they save people, even someone like me. There was a pause. Then Anna smiled through the airwaves. And yours saved me. I may not see faces, but I hear truths others miss. Who are you? Malik hesitated. For years he had been mocked, silenced, used, but something in her voice made him whisper, almost to himself. Just a poet. Anna laughed softly, the sound brighter than applause. Then you're exactly the kind of voice this world needs. And in that moment, Malik felt something he hadn't in years. Not greed, not ambition, not even survival. Hope. The calls turned into meetings. Anna's world was quiet, but not empty. She lived in darkness, blind since childhood, yet carried herself with a grace that left Malik in awe. She invited him into her world slowly, gently. Coffee at a small cafe near the station, walks through the park where she traced the sound of his steps to keep pace. She never treated him like a man of wealth or power. To her, he was just a voice, one that carried scars, honesty, and a tenderness the world never noticed. For Malik, it was disarming. He was used to people staring at his money, his house, his suits. Anna couldn't see any of it. She only heard him, listened to him, and in her presence, he stopped performing. One evening after he'd read her one of his newer poems, she tilted her head and smiled. You write like a man who's been wounded, but you speak like someone who hasn't given up. The words hit Malik deeper than she knew. But not everyone shared her faith in him. At her apartment, Malik finally met Anna's cousin, Sean Tall, confident, sharp in his pressed shirt. He hovered protectively, almost possessively. Over dinner, as conversation flowed, Sean casually mentioned, Anna's surgery is scheduled next month. The doctors think they can restore her sight. Anna's fingers paused over her glass, a small smile breaking across her face. It's a chance, at least. I've never seen the world with my own eyes. Maybe soon I will. Malik froze. The words lodged in his chest like a stone. The thought of her finally seeing him, his face, his skin, the very things people had always judged, terrified him. Sean caught the flicker in his eyes and leaned back, smirking. Big changes ahead, huh? You sure you're ready for that, Malik? Later, as Sean walked them to the door, he lingered close to Malik, his voice dropping to a whisper. She deserves someone real, not a man hiding behind shadows and poetry. Malik didn't answer. He couldn't, because beneath Sean's arrogance was the seed of Malik's deepest fear, that if Anna ever truly saw him, she might walk away too. The weeks after that dinner felt heavy. Malik still met Anna for coffee, still read to her in the park, still listened to her laughter. But in the quiet moments, his chest tightened with fear. What if Sean was right? What if, when the bandages came off, Anna saw him the way everyone else had a man, defined only by dark skin and a past full of scars? One evening, Malik arrived at Anna's apartment, only to find her on the couch smiling shyly. Sean was there too, standing like a sentinel. I told him, Anna said, cheeks warm, about the surgery, about my fears, and he made me a promise. Malik's eyes narrowed. What promise? Sean's smile was slick, rehearsed. That when she wakes up and finally sees the world, the first face she'll see will be mine, because I'll be her. Anna gasped softly, her hands fumbling with the edges of her blanket. Sean! But Sean pressed on, ignoring her. It makes sense, doesn't it? She needs someone steady, someone she can trust. I've been there my whole life, not some stranger who wandered in with fancy words and secrets he won't share. The words hit Malik like glass shattering inside his chest. He wanted to argue, to fight back, but Anna's silence cut deeper than anything Sean said. She wasn't agreeing, but she wasn't denying him either. Later that night, Malik paced the marble floors of his mansion. His empire surrounded him, wealth stacked in every corner, but his heart felt hollow. Powell, his bodyguard, stood by the window, silent, waiting. Finally, Malik turned to him, voice low, broken. If Sean gets in the way, if he ruins everything, I need you to handle it. Powell didn't move, didn't speak, just studied him with steady eyes. And for a long, tense moment, Malik's own conscience screamed louder than any silence in that room. His hand trembled, his throat closed. He couldn't say it again. Couldn't cross that line. Forget it, he whispered at last. I said nothing. Powell gave a single nod, as if he'd been waiting for Malik to pull himself back from the edge. But Malik knew the truth. He had come within a breath of ordering a man's death, not for survival, not for loyalty, but for love. And that terrified him more than losing Anna ever could. The night was long, but morning still came. Malik sat in his study, staring at an untouched notebook. Words should have poured out, they always had when pain pressed on him, but now his pen hovered uselessly above the page. His empire was flourishing. The factory ran smoother than ever. Profits soared. Politicians and businessmen lined up to shake his hand. Even his stepbrothers, the ones who once spat on his name, now groveled for his approval. But none of it mattered, because the one person he longed for, Anna, was slipping further away. He thought of Naomi, who had tried to return only when Marcus's empire collapsed. He thought of Lauren, broken yet brave enough to try again. And now Anna, the only soul who had seen him without ever seeing him. Soon she would see him with her eyes. And Malik feared she would vanish too. The night before Anna's surgery, Malik sat alone in his vast, empty study. The mansion was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed on the walls, echoing every thought he couldn't escape. On the desk before him lay his notebook, the same notebook that had once carried his survival, his sanity, his voice. Now it lay open to a blank page, his pen resting uselessly across it. Through the wide glass window, the city stretched beneath him, lights glowing, towers scraping the sky. It was everything he thought he had wanted: power, respect, wealth. Yet the sight of it filled him with nothing but dread. Powell appeared in the doorway, steady as always, waiting. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Both men knew what tomorrow meant. Anna's surgery, the day she would finally open her eyes and see. Malik's hands tightened on the edges of his chair. His voice, when it came, was low and cracked. If she sees me, it ends. She'll see what the world always saw. A man judged by his skin, his scars, his silence. Better she remembers the poet she trusted than the man she might learn to hate. Powell's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. He had served long enough to understand. Sometimes the strongest man was the one who chose to walk away. That night, Malik gathered nothing but his notebook. No jewels, no suits, no emblems of his empire. He moved quietly, almost reverently, as if shedding the skin of a life that had never truly been his. By morning, the mansion was empty. The city woke to rumors. The mysterious heir, the man who once carried Victor King's empire on his back, had vanished. But Malik hadn't vanished. He had simply chosen to step out of the world that had caged him. For the first time in his life, Malik was free, but freedom meant leaving behind the woman who had seen him most clearly and the empire that had cost him his soul. And with that, his footsteps carried him away from the city lights, toward a future no one could predict. The train wound its way through valleys and mountains, carrying Malik farther and farther from the city that had defined him. By the time he stepped off at a small Appalachian town, he was no longer Malik King, the shadow of Victor, the man with the empire. He introduced himself simply as Michael Reed, a quiet drifter with a love for books. No one in the town asked for more, and for the first time in his life, Malik was grateful for that kind of anonymity. The town itself was nothing like the glittering skyline he'd left behind. The streets were narrow, lined with worn brick buildings and corner diners. Life moved slowly here. People nodded at each other in the mornings. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, and the night sky was filled with stars Malik hadn't seen in years. It was at the community center where he found his purpose. The director, an older woman named Mrs. Dillard, had been struggling to keep after-school programs alive. When Malik offered to help with tutoring, she looked at him skeptically at first. "You got any experience teaching?" she asked, arms folded. Malik only smiled faintly, holding up his worn notebook. Just words, and a heart that believes in them. That was enough. Soon the children gathered around him in the afternoons, their faces wide with curiosity as he read poetry aloud, not the grand verses of dead poets, but his own words, born from struggle and silence. They scribbled in their notebooks, fumbling with rhymes, some barely knowing how to spell. Malik guided them patiently, gently, as if every child carried a hidden fire waiting to be lit. For the first time, Malik felt something he never had in his mansion or in his empire. Peace, no bodyguards, no wealth to protect, no shadows of Victor's empire looming over him. Just children learning to find their voices, the very thing he had fought his whole life to keep. And when the day ended, and he walked home beneath the Appalachian dusk, Malik breathed deep and realized he was finally living, not surviving. Years passed. The little Appalachian town changed slowly, the way small towns do. Children Malik once taught how to rhyme were now teenagers, some bold enough to call him Mr. Reed, with affection. Others still shy when they recited their verses in class. The community center walls filled with drawings, poems, and laughter. Malik, now older and gentler, wore his peace like a second skin. He no longer dreamt of skyscrapers, or boardrooms, or thrones of wealth. His empire was gone, and for once he didn't miss it. Then one autumn morning, a ripple moved through the town. The local news station had sent a crew to do a story on the center's literacy program, the kind of human interest segment that reminded the world small places mattered too. Malik barely noticed the fuss until she walked in. Anna. She was no longer the uncertain woman he had read poetry to in the park. She carried herself with confidence now, her hair styled neatly, her posture firm. She was a news anchor, polished and commanding, the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. The years had shaped her into everything she once dreamed of becoming. And yet, when her eyes scanned the crowded room, they brushed right past Malik. She didn't recognize him, not in his plain shirt, not in this humble corner of the world. He stayed still, heart pounding, as she spoke to the children, her voice bright and warm. She was here for the story, not for him. But then, when the segment wrapped and she wandered toward the stacks of books at the side of the room, Malik read aloud one of his poems to the children soft, almost to himself, out of habit more than anything else. Anna froze. Her breath caught in her chest, and she turned toward him slowly, her face tightening, as if the sound of his voice struck a hidden chord deep within her. She stepped closer. "Say that again," she whispered. Malik closed his notebook, meeting her gaze. For the first time in years, his voice trembled as he repeated the line. Her eyes shone with tears. Her hand reached up, trembling, brushing against his cheek the same way she used to when she couldn't see. "It's you," she breathed. "I thought I'd lost you forever." And in that crowded room full of children, cameras, and curious stares, time folded back upon itself. She hadn't recognized his face, but she had never forgotten his voice. The room seemed to dissolve around them. The cameraman fidgeted awkwardly, the children whispered in surprise, but neither Malik nor Anna moved away. Her fingers lingered on his face, tracing the familiar lines she had once only known by touch. Tears brimmed in her eyes, not of shock, not of disappointment, but of recognition. "All this time," she said, her voice breaking. "Why did you disappear?" Malik swallowed, guilt weighing heavy. "Because when you opened your eyes, I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me the way the world always did, less than enough. So I left. I thought it was better for you." Anna shook her head fiercely, her hand never leaving his cheek. "You were always enough. You were the only one who ever saw me when I couldn't see myself. Do you understand? That's love, Malik. That's all I ever wanted." The children clapped softly, not quite understanding the depth of what was unfolding, but sensing something important, something beautiful. The cameraman, touched, lowered his equipment. Anna took Malik's hand in both of hers. "Don't run again. Stay. Build something with me. Not an empire, something real." And in that moment, Malik knew she was right. He had built fortunes, commanded respect, worn crowns of wealth and power, but none of it had ever filled the hollow places inside him. This, her hand in his, her voice calling him enough, this was the only foundation worth building on. Months later, the first bricks were laid. Not for a mansion, not for a factory, but for the Malik Anna Literacy and Arts Academy, a place where children from every walk of life could learn, dream, and find their voices. The final scene opened in the Academy's small library. Malik sat in a circle with children at his feet, his deep voice weaving through the lines of a poem. Anna, radiant and proud, stood by the window as a live broadcast carried the story across the state. "For the world to hear," she said into the camera, her eyes never leaving Malik, "this is what dignity looks like. Not riches, not titles, but giving your voice to those who've never had one." Malik looked up, met her gaze, and smiled. For the first time in his life, the echo of his own words felt whole. The hollow crown was gone. In its place was a legacy that would last beyond him. And if Malik's story moved you, share it, because some legacies deserve to be remembered.